10 mysterious discoveries that still puzzle archaeologists. Without archaeological puzzles, researchers wouldn't have much of a career. Luckily for archaeologists, known objects turn up where they shouldn't, while unknown objects sometimes surface as one-of-a-kind, enormous structures built with dedication but no clear purpose. Civilizations may abandon advanced cities for no reason, and sometimes, there are even unusual treasures of gold. 1. The Riddled Jar. An ancient clay vessel reconstructed from pieces discovered at a Canadian museum, is riddled with tiny holes, leaving archaeologists baffled over what it was used for. The jar, just 16 inches, 40 centimeters, tall and dating back about 1,800 years, was found shattered into an unrecognizable 180 pieces in a storage room at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology. But even after it was restored, the scientists were faced with a mystery. So far no one has been able to identify another artifact like it from the Roman world. Everyone's stumped by it. Katie Urban, one of the researchers at the London, Ontario, Museum, told Live Science. We've been sending it around to all sorts of Roman pottery experts and other pottery experts, and no one seems to be able to come up with an example. The jar may have held rodent snacks for ancient Romans, or even served as a lamp, the researchers speculate, though no theory definitively holds water. Where did the jar come from? Archival research indicates the jar was among artifacts from Roman Britain, the part of Great Britain under Roman control from about AD 43 to 410, that were given to the museum in the 1950s by William Francis Grimes, an archaeologist who died in 1988. Grimes' team had dug them out of a World War II bomb crater in London, England, not far from an ancient temple dedicated to Mithra, an Iranian god who was popular throughout the Roman Empire. Urban cautioned, however, that it is not certain the jar is from that dig. The vessel does not appear to be on the list of artifacts received from Grimes, although she added that the jar was found in 180 pieces and the list was short on details. How it came to be in our collection is not 100% clear. We're still trying to figure that out, Urban said. There is a small chance the mystery vessel came from Iraq, because another collection of artifacts found in storage at the museum came from the ancient city of Ur. Those date as far back as 5,000 years ago. Leonard Woolley, an archaeologist best known for discovering a rich series of royal burials at Ur, had excavated them in 1931, and sent them to the British Museum. The museum in turn sent them to the University of Western Ontario, in 1933 as a gift. How was it used? The question on the team's mind is, why would a Roman create a jar full of holes? There are a lot of different options, a lot of them involving either a lamp, or some sort of animal container, Urban said, adding that while the tiny holes would have allowed light to pass through the object, the hole at its bottom suggests it wasn't a lamp. Another possibility is that the jar was used to store dormice, rodents found throughout Europe. Ancient texts suggest the mice were a popular snack for Romans. One ancient recipe suggests eating a dormouse stuffed with a forcemeat of pork and small pieces of dormouse meat trimmings, all pounded with pepper, nuts, laser, broth. Then, put the dormouse thus stuffed in an earthen casserole, roast it in the oven, or boil it in the stock pot. Urban said the problem with this theory is that dormice jars, from elsewhere in the Roman world, look different from this vessel. The rodent jars were equipped with a ramp that mice could run along, and used to help store food within the holes. Yet another idea is that the jar held snakes, ones too big to slither out through its holes. Snakes were a popular religious symbol throughout the ancient world. It's anyone's guess, said Urban. We need to find somebody who has seen something similar to it, but so far we haven't found that. The artifact is currently on display at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, as part of an exhibit on Ur and Roman Britain. The show runs through the first week of September. 2. The Alaska Artifact. An incredible archaeological discovery in Alaska provided evidence that trade was occurring between Asia and the New World centuries before Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas in 1492. Researchers uncovered 2 bronze artifacts in a 1,000-year-old house in Alaska, which were manufactured in China, Korea, or Yakutia. Live Science reports that the discovery was made at the Rising Whale site at Cape Espenberg, which lies on the Arctic Circle at the terminus of a 30 kilometers long mainland-attached beach ridge plain at the northern limit of Seward Peninsula, in western Alaska. Cape Espenberg has had an unbroken stream of cultural continuity for at least 1,000 years, the time when the Thule people and their descendants occupied the coast and adjacent interior regions of northwestern Alaska, report Darwin et al. 2013, in their paper 1,000 Years of House Change at Cape Espenberg, Alaska Archaeologists unearthed a bronze buckle with a piece of leather attached to it that was dated to 600 AD, as well as another ancient bronze relic, which appears to have been a whistle. Bronze working had not been developed at this time in Alaska, so it is thought the artifacts were manufactured in China, Korea, or Yakutia, before making their way to Alaska through trade routes. Though native copper and meteoritic iron, that is naturally occurring pure metals, were hammered into a variety objects by late prehistoric inhabitants of Arctic and subarctic North America, there is no evidence for the smelting, casting, or alloying of metals in the Western Hemisphere north of Mexico prior to the arrival of Europeans, reports the research team on the website Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. As a result, these 2 artifacts give the best and least ambiguous evidence to date that non-ferrous industrial smelted metals were arriving in Alaska via prehistoric trade across the Bering Strait. The bronze artifacts are not the only evidence for trade between Alaska and other civilizations prior to the arrival of Columbus in the Americas. Researchers also found the remains of obsidian artifacts inside the house, which could be chemically traced to the Onodira River Valley in Russia. In addition, a number of researchers have noted similarities in design between the plate armor worn by people in Alaska and that worn in China, Korea, Japan and eastern Mongolia. Plate armor made of overlapping plates of ivory and bones began appearing in Alaska around 1,000 years ago. A similar style of plate armor was also developed in several areas of East Asia, tracing back thousands of years. Last year, archaeologists in Russia reported on the discovery of a suit of armor made entirely of bone, which belonged to an ancient Siberian knight who lived around 4 millennia ago. The armor consists of different plates made up of small fragments of bone that have been joined together. It has long been known that Christopher Columbus was not the first to discover the New World. By 1,000 years ago, the Vikings had explored parts of Canada and had even established a short-lived settlement at Lanso Meadows in Newfoundland, writes Live Science. Research also indicates that, around this time, the Polynesians had reached South America, bringing sweet potatoes back to Polynesia and possibly bringing chickens to South America. A more controversial hypothesis is that China discovered the Americas 70 years before Columbus. However, this view put forward by amateur historian Gavin Menzies has been hugely debated. 3. Tongue of Stone. British researchers have identified a unique deviant burial of a skeleton, with a stone in place of the tongue. The body part had apparently been cut off, and replaced with a flat stone wedged into the mouth. Belonging to a male individual in his 30s, the 1,700-year-old skeleton was found in 1991, at a cemetery in Stanwick, in Northamptonshire, UK. When we dug it up we realized he had a stone in the mouth, so we lifted the skull in a block of soil. Only now we had the opportunity to study the remains in a laboratory, and in controlled conditions, Simon Mays, human skeletal biologist at Historic England, told Seeker. The skeleton dates to the 3rd or 4th century AD, when England was part of the Roman Empire. The man was interred face down, a position found in many deviant burials. The custom was used across societies to humiliate the dead. In most cases, prone burials were linked to the belief that the soul left the body through the mouth. Burying the dead face down was a way to prevent the impure soul from escaping and then threatening the living. According to Caroline Ahlstrom Arsini, author of the first global study on face-down burials, such burials are not as rare as it may seem, and have occurred across the world from 26,000 years ago up to the early 20th century. In her 2009 survey, Arsini recorded at least 600 bodies who had suffered the indignity of a face-down burial from 215 grave sites. Such data suggests the phenomenon is a conscious act, a deep-seated form of human behavior occurring in all cultures and religions, Arsini said. There is a clear pattern indicating that prone burials were used, for those who were different, she wrote. Face-down burials have been found in England in late Roman and early Saxon cemeteries. Yet, according to the researchers, the skeleton from Standwick is pretty unique. We couldn't find anything similar in the archaeological record. The closest we could get is the case of two skeletons from the same period, and a different part of England which were found with nails into the mouth, Mays said. The same cemetery that held the skeleton with the stone in place of the tongue featured other deviant burials. We found decapitated skeletons whose heads were replaced by stones and pots, Mays said. It appeared clear the flat stone was a replacement for a body part, because it had been put in the front of the mouth where the tongue ought to be, he added. Evidence of infection on the jawbones supports the theory that the tongue was amputated in life. The mouth is full of bacteria, so if a tongue is cut out, an infection is likely to arise, Mays said. Signs of active infection in the bones indicates the tongue was likely severed months, or even weeks before death. He probably died because of the infection following amputation of the tongue, Mays said. The reason for the gruesome excision remains a mystery. It may have been an act of punishment, following Germanic laws which ruled amputation of the tongue for those who made false accusations about other people. However, it is not known whether there were similar Roman practices. The other possibility is that the man bit his own tongue. It's something you find in people who suffer from severe mental illness, Mays said. It is also unknown why the tongue was replaced with a flat stone. Mays and colleagues believe the replacement was either a symbolic act to make the body complete again, or a way to prevent the corpse from becoming complete. In this case, the stone would have impeded a replacement of a living body part. They wanted to be sure the corpse didn't continue to behave as it did in life, Mays said. Mays and his team will carry out further investigations in the coming months. The research will include stable isotope studies to find out if the man was local to the area or came from elsewhere. Such studies may help us to understand this burial, and may lead to us revising our interpretations, Mays said. 4. The Jordan Wall. The Aerial Archaeology in Jordan project has mapped out a mysterious ancient wall in Jordan extending for some 150 kilometers, 93 miles, leaving archaeologists perplexed as to how it was built and why. Live Science reports that the existence of the wall was first reported in 1948 by Sir Alec Kirkbride, a British diplomat in Jordan, who had seen the structure overhead while in an airplane. However, it is only now that the wall has been mapped out in detail with aerial photography by the APAM, a long-term research project designed to illuminate settlement history in the Near East. Mapping an ancient wall. While the locals have long known about the existence of the wall, no attempts had been made until now to investigate and map out the details of the ancient structure. Archaeologists with the Aerial Archaeology in Jordan project therefore set out to photograph and create a detailed map of the wall, revealing that it contains sections where two walls run side by side, and other sections where the wall branches off in another direction. If we add the spurs and stretches of parallel wall, the total wall length may be about 150 kilometers, 93 miles, wrote David Kennedy, a professor at the University of Western Australia, and Rebecca Banks, a research assistant at Oxford University, in a paper published recently in the journal Zarift for Orient Archaeology. Kat Shebib, The Mysterious Wall of Jordan. Sir Alec Kirkbride's observation of the ancient wall was recorded, at the time, in the journal Antiquity. Traveling by air over the Mahant district, I noticed a stone wall running for no obvious purpose, across country, from a point about 12 kilometers west of the town of Milan, and terminating near the edge of the scarp. Kirkbride reported that the local inhabitants refer to the wall as Kat Shebib, Shebib's wall, who claimed that the wall was built by a prince of the Himyarite dynasty named Emir Shebib el-Tubai el-Himyari, who ruled Transjordan before the advent of Islam. However, others argue that the wall was not built by Shebib but simply used by him in the 10th century as a border marker to separate the arable land with water to the west from the barren hills and deserts of the nomads to the east. The wall is believed to have originally been a meter, or a meter and a half, 3.28 to 4.92 feet, in height, and was rough with no solid foundation, consisting simply of boulders piled one on top of the other. Nevertheless, the sheer size of the wall suggests that its construction was no easy feat. Because it was built of loose fieldstones, there is no way to tell exactly who first constructed the wall, reports Nabatea.net. However, to this day, this wall stands as a witness of the ingenuity of the people of that region and as one of the least known, yet amazing structures in the Middle East. A landscape of ancient structures. Along the Kat Shebib wall, archaeologists have also identified over 100 towers measuring 2 to 4 meters, 6.56 to 13.12 feet, in diameter. They are thought to have either been places of refuge, or small watch posts that could have had 1 or 2 men stationed there to watch for raiders trying to cross into their lands. However, the wall and towers sit in a wider landscape of ancient structures that have mystified archaeologists for decades. Also situated in the deserts of Jordan are giant geoglyphs, and earthworks in the shape of rings, kites, and wheels. The so-called works of old men are a series of giant wheels that have been dated to approximately 8,500 years, making them older than the famous Nazca lines in Peru by about 6,000 years. Archaeologists are still uncertain about who constructed the giant earthworks and structures across the landscape of Jordan and what their original purpose was. It is hoped that further investigations may help to unravel some of the mystery. 5. Mystery coins. Japanese archaeologists have announced that they had unearthed ancient Roman coins at the ruins of the medieval Katsurin Castle in Okinawa. Suffice it to say, this is very first time that ancient Roman objects have been discovered in faraway Japan, thus alluding to a really odd scope where archaeological evidence clashes with conventional historicity. In any case, the coins in question here pertain to 10 copper and bronze specimens, and the oldest ones among them date from around 300 to 400 AD, which corresponds to the late Roman Empire period. This is what archaeologist and professor at the Okinawa International University, Hiraki Magi, had to say about the fascinating find, to AFP. At first I thought they were 1-cent coins dropped by US soldiers. But after washing them in water I realized they were much older. I was really shocked. Now since we are talking about historicity, the Katsurin Castle, Kachingashaku, was originally built on a large limestone hill, with its 2 sides facing the Pacific Ocean. As for its previous archaeological record, the castle, designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2000, was home to exquisite tile works and Chinese porcelain, all dating from the contemporary 15th century. And by the next century, the fortress was probably abandoned, in spite of its strategic location that allowed it to function as a trading post that facilitated trade between Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. As for the context of this incredible discovery, a team of archaeologists have been conducting their excavation project at the castle site since 2013. And analysis of these coins by X-ray assessment revealed that some of the specimens were embossed with Roman letters and possibly the image of Emperor Constantine I, accompanied by a spear-armed soldier. Interestingly enough, the researchers have also found other types of coins, with few having their origins in 17th century Ottoman Empire. This bizarre scope naturally brings up the question, how did ancient Roman coins turn up in a medieval Japanese castle? Unfortunately, the archaeologists are as clueless as the rest of us, especially since the feudal lords residing in the Katsurin castle were not known to have any European business ties, though they were involved in regional trade networks. Malgi added, East Asian merchants in the 14th and 15th centuries mainly used Chinese currency, a round coin with a square hole in the middle, so it is unlikely that the Western coins were used as a means of currency. I believe they probably got the Roman coins in Southeast Asia or China. 6. The Kyralkis lions. 2 sculptures of life-size lions, each weighing about 5 tons in antiquity, have been discovered in what is now Turkey, with archaeologists perplexed over what the granite cats were used for. One idea is that the statues, created between 1400 and 1200 BC, were meant to be part of a monument for a sacred water spring, the researchers said. The lifelike lions were created by the Hittites who controlled a vast empire in the region at a time when the Asiatic lion roamed the foothills of Turkey. The lions are prowling forward, their heads slightly lowered, the tops of their heads are barely higher than the napes, writes Jeffrey Summers, of the Middle East Technical University, and researcher Rara Lawson in an article published in the most recent edition of the American Journal of Archaeology. The 2 lion sculptures have stylistic differences, and were made by different sculptors. The lion sculpture found in the village of Kyralkis is particularly lifelike, with rippling muscles and a tail that curves around the back of the granite boulder. The sculptors certainly knew what lions looked like, Summers said. He said that both archaeological and ancient written records indicate that the Asiatic lion, now extinct in Turkey, was still very much around, some even being kept by the Hittites in pits. Curiously, the sculpture at Kyralkis has an orange color caused by the oxidization of minerals in the stone. Summers said that he doesn't believe it had this color when it was first carved. The story of the discovery of the massive lions began in 2001, when Ozan, at the time director of the Yazgid Museum, was alerted to the existence of the ancient quarry by a man from Kyralkis village and an official from the Ministry of Culture. An extensive search of the area was undertaken in spring 2002, with field work occurring in the following years. Looters, however, beat the archaeologists to the catch. The Kyralkis lion was found dynamited in 2, likely in the mistaken belief that it contained hidden treasure. There's this belief that monuments like this contain treasure, said Summers, explaining that the dynamiting of monuments is a problem in Turkey. It makes the Turkish newspapers every month or so. The second lion, found to the northeast of the village, had also been split in 2. As a result of this destruction, both lion sculptures, which originally were paired with another, now mainly have 1 lion intact. The danger of new looting loomed over the researchers while they went about their work. In the summer of 2008, evidence of fresh treasure hunting was found at the ancient quarry, along with damage to a drum-shaped rock that, in antiquity, was in the process of being carved. What were they intended for? The discovery of the massive lions, along with other pieces in the quarry, such as a large stone basin about 7 feet, 2 meters, in diameter, left the archaeologists with a mystery. What were they intended for? A search of the surrounding area revealed no evidence of a Hittite settlement dating back to the time of the statues. Also, the sheer size of the sculptures meant that the sculptors likely did not intend to move them very far. Summers hypothesizes that, rather than being meant for a palace or a great city, the lions were being created for a monument to mark something else, water. I think it's highly likely that that monument was going to be associated with one of the very copious springs that are quite close, he said in the interview. There are good parallels for associations of Hittite sculptural traditions with water sources. Indeed, one well-known monument site, known as Aflatun Pinar, holds a sacred pool that is fed by a spring beneath the pool itself, write Yeterbul and Alice Mouton in an article that was published in the most recent edition of the Journal of Near Eastern Studies. The 2 researchers were writing about water religions in ancient Anatolia, Turkey. According to the Hittite cuneiform texts, water was seen as an effective purifying element, Yeterbul and Mouton write, used in the form of lustrations or even full baths during ritual performances. Its cleansing power is self-evident. To the Hittites, the natural world, springs included, was a place of great religious importance, one worthy of monuments with giant lions. These things, water sources, were sacred, just as their mountains were sacred, Summers said. 7. The Danish spirals. Every amateur archaeologist dreams about finding the big one. A few years ago, it happened to a pair of hopefuls, when they buzzed a field in Denmark with metal detectors, and got their hands on some gold. The 4 large rings prompted experts to browse the same field, situated next to the island town of Boeslund, in the hope of finding more Bronze Age artifacts. What they discovered exceeded their wildest expectations. Not only was it more gold from 700 to 900 BC, but the number of artifacts didn't stick to a measly 4 spirals, thin as hair and about 2.5 centimeters, 1 in long, turned up in a cache numbering 2,000 curls. Found together between fur and wooden fragments, the treasure was probably buried in a luxurious box. What the spirals signified or were used for produced many imaginative theories, but the main suspects include ritual objects sacrificed in the field or clothing accessories. Almost 2,000 gold spirals from the Bronze Age have been unearthed in Denmark. The discovery has baffled archaeologists, who say they have never seen anything yet before. They surmise that the fine gold spirals, dating to the Bronze Age between 900 and 700 BC, may have been part of a priest-king's costume. The spirals measure up to 1 inch, 3 centimeters, in length and are made of very thin, flattened gold wire. They were discovered at Boeslund, Denmark by Flemming Kohl, curator at the National Museum of Denmark, and Kirsten Christensen, curator at Museum Vestjylland. Mr. Kohl said, "Maybe the spirals have been attached to cords, which have served as a small fringe on a hat or a parasol. Perhaps they have been braided into the hair, or been embroidered on the suit. The fact is that we do not know, but I tend to believe they were part of a priest-king's costume or headwear." A couple of years ago, 2 local amateur archaeologists discovered 4 heavy gold arm rings called oath rings in the area, raising the prospect that more prehistoric gold may be buried. Archaeologists from Museum Vestjylland found just a few spirals at first, but later more were discovered with a combined weight of between 7 and 11 ounces, 200 and 300 grams. One was taken to a jeweler who confirmed the spiral was made of gold, not brass. The team also found 2 gilded dress pins, enabling them to date the mysterious spirals. Many of the spirals appear to have been buried in a fur-lined wooden box and were found in a big lump, while small bundles of 3 and 4 pieces were found within a few feet. Beneath the lump of spirals were black flakes of birch pitch, evidence that pitch was used to hold a leather lining inside a wooden box with a bark lid. Such a box may have made to hold a fine gold headdress, the researchers said. They were not surprised to find precious gold items at Boeslund, because the area has produced some of the largest gold finds from the Bronze Age in Northern Europe. 6 other large and heavy oath rings have been found at the site, and in the 1800s, farmers found 6 gold vessels at Borgjert Bank, located 1,640 feet, 500 meters away, with a combined weight of 2.2 pounds, 1 kilo. Ms. Christensen said, "It shows that the place had a special significance for the Bronze Age people when they chose to sacrifice several kilos of gold." Mr. Kohl believes Boeslund was considered to be a sacred place in the Bronze Age, and that prehistoric people may have performed rituals including offering gold to higher powers. He thinks that the gold spirals and oath rings may have belonged to a kind of priest-king. It's possible that the priest would have worn a gold ring on his wrist, and gold spirals on this cloak and hat so that they shone like the sun during ritual ceremonies. The sun was one of the most sacred symbols in the Bronze Age, and gold was highly valued and sometimes embodied the sun, he explained. Mr. Kohl thinks the people sacrificed the priest-king's riches to the sun, or hid them away in a wooden box between the ceremonies. He and the other archaeologists believe there is more prehistoric gold to be found at Boeslund and will continue their excavations. 8. The Jerusalem versus. There is a site so mysterious in Jerusalem that archaeologists don't know what to make of it. Located in the eastern part of the city, rooms are molded from the oldest bedrock in Jerusalem. Recently, 3 furrows were found carved into one of the limestone floors. Perfectly V-shaped, the patterns have a depth of 5 centimeters, 2 in, and measure 50 centimeters, 20 in, long. Once again, pottery pieces hint at when the complex was last used, around 800 BC. But anonymous hands cut the shapes 3,000 years ago at the earliest. The purpose of the versus defies identification. However, the environment is not without interesting clues. The rooms were part of a superbly engineered stronghold constructed around Jerusalem's only natural spring. Another room held a standing stone with markings reminiscent of some pagan religion, the only one of its kind found in the city. A 100-year-old map, created by a British explorer, also shows a V symbol in an underground tunnel not yet explored in recent times. The answer to one of the world's most stubborn mysteries may lie hidden on the site of the destroyed Jewish temple, under a historic Islamic shrine, beneath a bedrock outcropping of utmost significance to the 3 major monotheistic religions, and in a secret chamber below an underground cave. The Well of Souls, thought to be located on the Jerusalem site known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary, may contain the fabled and elusive Ark of the Covenant. This is the sacred vessel that, according to biblical account, contained the original 10 Commandments tablets that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai, as the ancient Israelites wandered the desert. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, the intrepid Indiana Jones finds the Ark of the Covenant in a room called the Well of Souls, though in the Hollywood version the site was relocated from Jerusalem to the ancient Egyptian city of Tanis. The Well of Souls is purportedly located below a natural cave under the rock upon which Jewish tradition says Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. Islamic tradition indicates Muhammad ascended to heaven from this same stone. No one knows with absolute certainty whether the Well of Souls, or the Ark of the Covenant, actually exists. Though knocking on the floor of the cave under the Muslim dome of the rock shrine elicits a resounding hollow echo, no one has ever seen this alleged chamber. The Temple Mount itself is rife with a network of some 45 cisterns, chambers, tunnels, and caves. No archaeological evidence. There has never been any proper archaeological exploration of the site, which is under control of the Waqf Muslim Religious Trust. Famed 19th-century British explorers Charles Wilson and Sir Charles Warren could neither prove nor disprove the existence of a hollow chamber below the cave. They believed the sound reportedly heard by visitors was simply an echo, in a small fissure beneath the floor. Shimon Gibson, Senior Fellow at the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem, published a definitive review together with colleague David Jacobson called Below the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a source book on the cisterns, subterranean chambers and conduits of the Haram al-Sharif. Since the 19th century, no Westerner has been allowed access to the subterranean chambers on the Temple Mount, Gibson said. I would have liked to disguise myself as a local Waqf worker and infiltrate these sites, but I wouldn't want to run the risk of creating an international incident. Historic references to the Ark of the Covenant were rare following the establishment of the First Temple, and it disappeared entirely from the record by the time of King Herod around 40 BC. The Ark was possibly demolished during the Babylonian destruction of the First Temple in 586 BC, or was spirited away and hidden during the invasion. It might also have been destroyed or stolen when the Roman legions invaded Jerusalem in AD 70. Unlikely survivor. According to biblical accounts, the ark was constructed of wood and coated with sheets of gold. There is general scholarly agreement that, at least at one point, it was indeed hidden in a chamber under the Temple Mount, perhaps in the Well of Souls. However, it would not likely have survived the damp and unfavorable conditions. The ark probably would have disintegrated. Unless, of course, it had holy properties. But I, as an archaeologist, cannot talk about the theoretical holy properties of a wooden box, Gibson said. The mystery of the Ark of the Covenant has fascinated laymen, writers, and armchair explorers for centuries. Countless books have been written on this. Indiana Jones is simply another one, though in movie format, Haifa University archaeologist Ronnie Reich said. But we have no real information on this. The Temple Mount and the natural cave below the Dome of the Rock are periodically open to tourists, depending upon the local security and political situation. 9. The missing residents. In the 1920s, the discovery of ancient cities at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in Pakistan gave the first clue to the existence, more than 4,000 years ago, of a civilization in the Indus Valley, to rival those known in Egypt and Mesopotamia. These cities demonstrated an exceptional level of civic planning and amenities. The houses were furnished with brick-built bathrooms and many had toilets. Wastewater from these was led into well-built brick sewers that ran along the center of the streets, covered with bricks or stone slabs. Cisterns and wells finely constructed of wedge-shaped bricks held public supplies of drinking water. Mohenjo-daro also boasted a great bath on the high mound, citadel, overlooking the residential area of the city. Built of layers of carefully fitted bricks, gypsum mortar and waterproof bitumen, this basin is generally thought to have been used for ritual purification. However, in contrast to the well-appointed houses and clean streets, the uppermost levels at Mohenjo-daro contained squalid makeshift dwellings, a careless intermingling of residential and industrial activity and, most significantly, a series of more than 40 sprawled skeletons lying scattered in streets and houses. Paul Ban, 2002, describes the scene. In a room with a public well in one area of the city were found the skeletons of two individuals who appeared desperately to have been using their last scraps of energy to crawl up the stair leading from the room to the street. The tumbled remains of two others lay nearby. Elsewhere in the area, the strangely contorted and incomplete remains of 9 individuals were found, possibly thrown into a rough pit. In a lane between 2 houses in another area, another 6 skeletons were loosely covered with earth. Numerous other skeletons were found within layers of rubble, ash and debris, or lying in streets in contorted positions that suggested the agonies of violent death. A violent massacre. The remains of these individuals led many archaeologists, at the time, to conclude that these people all died by violence. Sir Mortimer Wheeler, who excavated at Mohenjo-daro in 1950s, believed they were victims of a single massacre, and suggested that the Indus civilization, whose demise was unexplained, had fallen to an armed invasion by Indo-Aryans, nomadic newcomers from the northwest, who are thought to have settled in India during the 2nd millennium BC. Wheeler claimed the remains belonged to individuals who were defining the city in its final hours. He was so convincing that this theory became the accepted version of the fate of the Indus civilization. However, many of his claims simply did not add up. There was no evidence that the skeletons belonged to defenders of the city, as no weapons were found and the skeletons contained no evidence of violent injuries. Some archaeologists suggested that the influx of Indo-Aryan people occurred after the decline of the Indus civilization, while others questioned whether an Indo-Aryan invasion of the subcontinent even took place at all. Flood and disease. An alternative theory was put forward that the city suffered extensive flooding, and that people died off as a result of waterborne diseases such as cholera. Recent investigations revealed considerable evidence of flooding at Mohenjo-daro in the form of many layers of silty clay. The Indus River was prone to change its course and through the centuries moved gradually eastward, leading periodically to flooding within the bounds of the city. Indeed, the massive brick platforms on which the city is constructed, and the fortifications around parts of it seemed to have been designed to provide protection against such floods. Conditions would have been ideal for the spread of waterborne diseases, especially cholera, although cholera epidemics cannot be proved to have occurred. The conclusion that many mainstream archaeologists now make is that the massacre victims from Mohenjo-daro were simply the victims of the natural tragedy of fatal disease rather than that of human aggression. But this conclusion also has many holes. Why did the remains of individuals appear in contorted positions, almost frozen at the very moment of death. Why did they appear to have been struck down suddenly? Surely if they died of disease their bodies would have been buried and not found scattered around the city? Evidence of atomic war? There exist a growing number of alternative archaeologists and researchers who have not settled for theories that do not satisfactorily explain the conditions of the skeletal remains, and who have sought other explanations. One such individual is David Davenport, British Indian researcher, who spent 12 years studying ancient Hindu scripts and evidence at the site where the great city once stood. In his book Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC he reveals some startling findings. The objects found at the site appeared to be fused, glassified by a heat as high as 1,500 degrees Celsius, followed by a sudden cooling. Within the city itself there appeared to be an epicenter about 50 yards wide within which everything was crystallized, fused or melted, and 60 yards from the center the bricks are melted on one side indicating a blast. A. Gorbowski in his book Riddles of Ancient History, reported the discovery of at least one human skeleton in the area with a level of radioactivity approximately 50 times greater than it should have been due to natural radiation. Davenport claimed that what was found at Mohenjo-daro corresponded exactly to what was seen at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. 10. The Golan structure. It may be one of the Middle East's most mysterious structures, but it's easy to miss from the roadside. The prehistoric stone monument of Rujmelahiri, or Gilgal-Rephaim, went unnoticed for centuries in a bare expanse of field in the disputed region of the Golan Heights. Now archaeologists have dated it to 5,000 years old, making it roughly the same age as Stonehenge in Wiltshire, but they still don't know who built it, or why. Theories include an ancient calendar, or a sky burial site in which dead bodies were placed on top of stone mounds, to be picked apart by vultures. Archaeologists first spotted the monument, composed of 5 stone concentric circles, by studying an aerial survey. The images were released after Israel captured the territory from the Syria during the Six-Day War of 1967. Since this discovery, a number of excavations have revealed it's one of the oldest and largest structures in the region. And now shards of pottery and flint tools have been used to date the site. Scholars generally agree construction started as early as 3500 BC, but other parts may have been added to the structure during the following 2,000 years. By comparison, Stonehenge is believed to date back around 4,614 years. Known as Rujmelahiri in Arabic, meaning the stone heap of the wildcat, the complex has a 15-foot-high, 4.5 meters, burial chamber at the center of 5 circles, the largest of which measures more than 500 feet, 152 meters, wide. Its Hebrew name of Gilgal-Rephaim means Wheel of Giants, and refers to an ancient race of giants mentioned in the Bible. Unlike the famous English monument built using around 100 huge stones topped by lintels, the Golan structure is made of piles of thousands of smaller basalt rocks that together weigh over 40,000 tons. It's an enigmatic site, said Uri Berger, an expert on megalithic tombs with the Israel Antiquities Authority. We have bits of information, but not the whole picture. Scientists come and are amazed by the site and think up their own theories. Standing on the ground inside the complex, it looks like a labyrinth of crumbling stone walls overgrown with weeds. But from the top of the 16-foot-high, 5 meters, burial mound, it is possible to make out a circular pattern. Only from the air does the impressive shape of a massive bullseye clearly emerge. Dr. Berger said no one knows who built it, another parallel to Stonehenge, the purpose of which has remained a mystery for millennia. Some think Rujmelahiri may have been constructed by a nomadic civilization that settled in the area, but it would have required a tremendous support network that travelers might not have had. Whatever the case, it is thought the monument could have astronomical significance, and may have been used as an observatory. On the shortest and longest days of the year, the June and December solstices, the sunrise lines up with openings in the rocks, Dr. Berger said. Rujmelahiri may have alternatively been built primarily as a burial chamber, but for whom is still a mystery. If this was the reason it was constructed, Any body or bodies have since been removed or stolen. All the 5 big, huge monumental walls around us are all, we think, were built for this chamber, the one who was buried inside. This is one of the theories, continued Dr. Berger. However, some argue the circles preceded the tomb and were built for another purpose, perhaps as an ancient calendar marking the arrival of the seasons and astronomical events. A 2010 report suggested the tomb may have been added 2,000 years after the rest of the structure, while another theory by Dr. Rami Arov that emerged a year later suggests the circle and mound were built at the same time and were used for sky burials. This is when a body is placed on top of a mound for birds such as vultures to pick clean. Visitors can explore the wall of Ruj Melahiri at weekends and holidays, but the prehistoric site lies in an area now used for training by Israel's military. Other large circular structures have been found in neighboring Syria and Jordan.